Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We have a video here from Celtic History Decoded, and it's differences between Scottish and English DNA. Sounds really interesting to me, actually. I've got a lot of English DNA personally, as to you guys, most likely, or Scottish, maybe both. But I will link this video in the description along with a link over to Patreon and a link of how you can support the channel here on YouTube if you enjoy the content and engaging with me, helping me find videos to watch. That is a great place to uh, kind of be seen and to get some extra perks yourself. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it.
What are the DNA differences and similarities between Scotland and England? Now, so much has been said about Scotland and England over the years, yet there has been very little genetic comparisons between the two. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this video, and we'll also look at the different rates of physical traits and genetic conditions between Scotland and England. Now, both these countries initially formed into early kingdoms in the medieval period, Scotland in 843 AD and England in 927. They then developed over the centuries into the countries we recognise today with their modern borders. In 1707, England and Scotland unified into the Kingdom of Great Britain through the Acts of Union. Yet their people retain some distinct cultural and genetic identities that we will look at in this video. Now, the DNA story of Scotland and England doesn't just apply to the people that live in these countries, like myself in Scotland today. It also applies to so many people across the world, as so many people have Scottish or English ancestry, or a combination of the two. As you can see in this table, the United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand have the most amount of people with at least one of these descents across the globe, with over 50 million people having Scottish or English ancestry in the United States. People who live in Scotland and England also often have mixed ancestry as well, of course. But what are the main genetic differences between Scotland and England, and how different are they? And please let me know in the comments below if you have Scottish or English ancestry and what your ancestry is in general. Now, both of these people trace the majority of their ancient ancestry to three main sources: Western hunter-gatherers, early European farmers, and then steppe ancestry. However, studies have found subtle differences in the rates of these components. For instance, Scotland has slightly higher levels of both steppe ancestry and Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. England, on the other hand, tends to have a bit more early European.
I was just pulling mine up. So with mine, my DNA stuff when I did it, the Scottish comes out under the Celtic and the Gaelic as opposed to England, and so it's got the central Scotland and Northern Ireland lumped together, which I have 13% of. And then my English is southeastern England and northwestern Europe, West Midlands and northeast England. So if you add all of them up, I'm 16% English. So 16% English, 13% Scottish. So this applies to me.
Farmer ancestry. These differences are quite subtle, however. Now, a significant divergence in the ancestry of Scotland and England came in the early medieval period, beginning around the 5th century AD. This was when the Anglo-Saxons arrived, who of course had far more of an influence on England than Scotland. This impact was especially high in certain parts of England, with a 2016 study estimating that on average, the contemporary East English population derives 38% of its ancestry from the Anglo-Saxon migrations. The impact of the Anglo-Saxons does seem to vary in different parts of England, however, with it much lower in parts of the north. In contrast, Scotland retained more of its indigenous Celtic and pre-Anglo-Saxon DNA. Although we do see some impact on parts of Scotland, mainly in the lowlands and the southeast of the country. This difference is also reflected in the haplogroups found in the modern populations of Scotland and England, something we will look at later in the video. But what about the Vikings? Well, the impact of the Vikings was actually different in Scotland versus England. Although the Vikings had a genetic influence on both populations, there was a different regional impact. Vikings from the land we call Denmark today had a much greater influence on English DNA, whereas Vikings from the land we call Norway today had a much greater impact on Scottish DNA. There was also regional differences within Scotland and England as well. As you can see in this table, the impact was highest in the Northern Isles of Orkney and Shetland, but also notable in the Western Isles of Scotland and Eastern England. This influence in Eastern England is largely a legacy of the Danelaw period. Now, I should note as well that there is a difficulty when looking at the genetic impact on England of Danish Vikings versus Anglo-Saxons from Denmark, as both had similar genetic signals. With this being said, the overall impact of the Vikings on Scotland and England was probably quite similar, at around 6 to 10%. And as far as Viking haplogroups, two in particular are worth mentioning: R1A Z284 and I1. These markers are still found in Scotland and England today, and we'll go into more detail later in the video on Scottish versus English haplogroups. Before we look at the haplogroups of Scotland versus England, I first wanted to look at the different levels, the different frequencies of physical traits in Scotland versus England, as well as genetic conditions. Now basically there are two types of physical traits that are higher in Scotland than England. The first one is red hair. Scotland has the most amount of redheads on the planet alongside Ireland. In Scotland, around 10 to 13% of people have red hair, and roughly 40% also carry at least one red hair allele. Only between 4 and 6% of people in England have red hair on the other hand. This is still higher than the global average of 1 to 2%.
It's funny, my son's dad said that they had Viking ancestry, and he's one of those people, he's got dark hair, but when he has a beard, it's kind of red. And my hair has a lot of red in it, especially when I was pregnant. It got really red. And when my son was born, he had red hair, which is now just kind of gone to the strawberry blonde, and it just seems like it keeps getting darker. But I don't know, maybe he was right.
But obviously much lower than Scotland. This disparity aligns with the idea that the red hair genetic mutations were more common in Celtic fringe populations of Britain and Ireland down through history. The high frequency in Scotland, as well as in Ireland, points to genetic drift or selection in those populations, and red hair is also high in another population who speaks a Celtic language, in Wales, the Welsh. This again speaks to a Celtic link with red hair. And on the subject of physical traits, Scotland also has slightly higher levels of blue eyes than England, with them around 50% in Scotland compared to 48% in England. Now, another genetic trait that is higher in Scotland than England is hemochromatosis, an inherited condition where iron slowly builds up in the body. This iron overload can damage parts of the body such as the liver, the joints, pancreas, and heart. It most often affects people of Northern European background and is particularly common in Celtic countries, such as Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Given this, the condition is sometimes known as the Celtic curse. Now, rates of hemochromatosis are higher in Scotland than England. In Scotland, around 1 in 113 people have this condition, compared to roughly 1 in 150 people in England. This again speaks to the idea that Scotland has more Celtic ancestry than England, and we also see this overarching difference when we look at the Y-DNA haplogroups of the two countries. Now, haplogroup R1b is the dominant Y-DNA lineage in both Scotland and England, reflecting their common Western European heritage. However,
Have you guys, well, one, I guess I think you could do both, but like, have you done where your ancestry, where they like actually analyze DNA and you could pull up and see like these particular, like, I don't know if they're called sequences, but you know how he's referring to like the coding of certain DNAs and what that can like preclude and stuff like that. We had done ours, but it would obviously these weren't things that I was aware of or looking for at the time. We were just looking for some other stuff, but it is really, really interesting. You know, you can't necessarily use that to like say, okay, well, I'll definitely have this, but that know that it's certainly a possibility. But let me know if you guys have done that as well. I think we had transferred our ancestry over to the, what was it, 1, 2, 3. don't know, something, but it keeps changing hands and getting bought off. I don't know if I went through and deleted it or not because they were saying to do that. One, two, three, you and me, at the end, I don't know. But it is interesting. It's really interesting.
However, the subtypes of R1b most prevalent in each population differ, and speak to the different historical episodes that affected them differently. Scotland is dominated by R1b L21. This subtype is often called the Celtic branch of R1b, as it is found in high frequencies in populations with a historic Celtic identity, in the Atlantic fringe of Europe, including Brittany and France, which still speaks a Celtic language today. R1b-L21 is found in around 75 to 80% of men in Scotland, the most common haplogroup by far. England, on the other hand, has a much higher level of the subclad R1b-U106. This branch of R1b reaches its peak frequencies in the North Sea regions, i.e. in places like the Netherlands, northwest Germany, Denmark and southeast England, and is associated with the migration of Anglo-Saxons and related Germanic peoples. England also has a Celtic backdrop though, and is thus dominated by two main branches of R1b. R1b L21, which is higher in the north of the country and associated more with Celtic ancestry, and then R1b U106, which is highest in the south and east of the country and is associated more with Germanic ancestry. This table shows the breakdown of the main Y-DNA haplogroups in Scotland versus England. You can see how R1b L21 dominates Scotland, but England has a mixture of these two subclads of R1b. England also has slightly higher levels of I1. This reflects the fact that England has more Northern European ancestry in general, as I1 is common in Scandinavia as well as Northern Germany and Northern Europe in general. It is thus linked to both the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxon migrations due to this, but the main reason for the higher rates in England is driven by this larger Anglo-Saxon component, as the Viking influence was similar in both countries. So what can we say about Scottish and English DNA overall? Well, both countries have a shared genetic foundation with notable twists. Both groups are fundamentally northwestern European, sharing the ancient genetic layers of hunter-gatherers, early farmers and steppe ancestry. They also both absorbed waves of Celtic and Germanic migrants in the Iron Age and early medieval periods. The differences lie in the relative proportions of these inputs. The English genome shows a greater signature of Anglo-Saxon and continental European influence, where the Scottish genome retains a higher degree of indigenous Celtic ancestry. This is evident in specific genetic markers, notably the Celtic-associated R1b-L21 versus the Germanic-associated R1b-U106. We also see this in certain traits, like red hair and hemochromatosis, which are both higher in Scotland. So in other words, Scotland has more Celtic ancestry and England has more of a Germanic influence, but this is against the backdrop England obviously still has a good amount of Celtic ancestry, and we see this with R1b-L21 still found in reasonable numbers in England. Yet overall, Scotland and England genetically are very similar. If we look at the mitochondrial haplogroups, for example, we can see that the two countries have almost identical levels of these markers, and autosomal DNA is very similar between the two. But like I say, Scotland does have more of a Celtic influence, and England more of a Germanic influence, although they are similar overall. But what does your eye colour say about your ancestry? Well, to find out, please click here. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and hit the bell, and
That's really interesting. So even though you guys are kind of, not, I know you guys don't like being like, if you're English, you're English. If you're Welsh, you're Welsh. If you're Scottish, you're Scottish. But you share a lot of common DNA and a lot of differences. I kept thinking about a friend of mine from high school that her mom was Welsh, from Welsh, and her dad was Greek, and he was from Greek. And it's so funny because there were two of them. It was her and her sister, and they were polar opposites if you were looking at them. It's like my friend took after her mother, very pale, blue eyes, red hair, and then her sister absolutely took after her dad, dark complected, dark hair, dark eyes. It's funny how the cards fall with the DNA because, like, with my mom too, she's one of eight that came from the same mother and father, and most of her and her siblings have done their DNA testing, and it's wild. I mean, even though they're so, obviously same regions for the most part, the differences of how much one will get. Like, I think my uncle, one of my uncles had like 40% Jewish, and then the next closest one I think was my mom that was like 26%. And so it's just like eh, the, the amount of those just it's pretty cool. It's really neat. Um but I enjoyed it. I don't know if you guys did. There were obviously a lot of terms in there that I'm not familiar with, but I think he did a really excellent job at kind of explaining everything. Um, I liked him a lot. He seemed like a really knowledgeable fella, and I enjoy his accent. But hopefully, you guys enjoyed that video. I certainly did. Again, that was from Celtic History Decoded. I wouldn't mind watching some more of his videos if you guys are interested. Let me know in the comments. Hit the like button, share, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Um, Hype the video, all that jazz. Thank you guys for watching. Have an awesome, awesome day.